This is a notice for all participants. This is a public meeting and proceedings are being webcast live online. A recording will be available for playback on the Council's website shortly afterwards. Please note that your name will appear in the live stream and in the recording. Should you not wish for your image to appear on these, please turn off your camera. Third parties should not record or film the local plan hearing sessions, and neither the Council nor the Planning Inspectorate are liable for any third-party recordings. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome back everyone to this afternoon's session. I'm pretty sure that everybody here has already participated, but if not, welcome along. My name is Matthew Birkinshaw, Chartered Town Planner and the Inspector appointed by the Secretary of State. So this morning we have been looking at some of the site allocations as part of the examination of the Tunbridge Wells Borough Local Plan, and this afternoon we are continuing with the remaining sites for today. I mentioned it this morning. What I'll do, I'm mindful that most people are here this afternoon to talk about site RTW 16, which is Spratsbrook Farm. So what I'll propose to do is I'll rejig the agenda slightly and we'll take that one first, because that's the probably the one for the one with the most interest in this afternoon's session. So bear with me on that basis while I just bring up the relevant page on the plan, and we'll take that one first. Okay, so as with other sites, we'll go through the matters, issues and questions in the MIQ documents that I've asked, and I've taken people's hearing statements largely as read. But just as with other sites, this is one where the local plan identifies a much larger site boundary, and then within the plan, so map 16, it has a site layout plan, which again identifies an area of open space and landscaping, and then an area for residential development. So just by way of introduction to this site then of other people who may be participating and watching online, if I could ask the council to explain very briefly and roughly what the proposed site boundary is based on, and why we've ended up with this. I'll call them halves, so they're probably not exactly half, but why I've ended up with this sort of eastern and western half as residential development and open space.
Okay, yeah. I just refer you to page 23 of the council statement, where we refer to this site and set out the rationale for the boundary of the site as it's shown, as you say, map 16 and the site layout plan. And I think it's just worth noting some of the history in terms of this site, that it was previously allocated within the draft local plan at the Reg 18 stage as a larger site for residential development and for a new secondary school as well. So that was the allocation as it stood at that stage. Following consultation at the Regulation 18 stage and comments received and further evidence that the council carried out to further inform the local plan, the site boundary was amended. Well, the area for built development was amended to just include the southern parcel of the land. The whole site falls within the green belt, but only the northern part of the site falls within the area of outstanding natural beauty. So the council, taking account of the evidence base and the further work that was carried out, in particular the landscape and visual impact assessment, which fed into the sort of consideration of the site, has led the council to just allocate the southern parts of the site for residential development, and the northern parts should remain open space and landscape buffer, and to protect the the A and B in this location.
So again, just points of clarification then. So none of the area shown indicatively as residential developments, none of that's within the AONB?
No.
No. And question similarly to this morning, really. Then, so what's the rationale for including the rest of it within the allocation? Why not just say, okay, the allocation is the residential elements, and the rest of it is just remains as per its existing designations?
Again, in terms of the overall sort of consideration of the site that was submitted and considered by the council, to secure the northern part of the site for informal open space and as a buffer area, it's to provide that certainty and also contributes to the exceptional circumstances for the release of the land by providing that informal open space area and can be secured by way of sort of a management plan, which is referred to within policy AL RTW 16.
So in terms of the greenbelt boundary, then the whole site's in the greenbelt at the moment. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so only the area shown for residential development would be removed from the greenbelt. So the remainder of it, like we talked about this morning with the other sites,
yes,
the remainder of that is obviously remains in the A and B, but there's no greenbelt boundary proposed there. It's just the residential element that's proposed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of the other sort of parcel, then what's envisaged there? Obviously, it would form part of the allocation, but there'd be no residential development. So what's council expecting to happen there?
Okay, I think if I refer you to page 28 of our statement, where the response deals with the management of the open space, and I think we've got there a reference to criteria 5 of policy ALRTW 16, where we say that the open space would be managed under an approved scheme of agriculture with public access. And I think it may be that we need to provide a bit more sort of clarification of what that would include in terms of how we would want that land to be, sort of the character of that land. The intention is that it retain the sort of existing character of that area. So whether there's whether agriculture is the right sort of word there, or whether we need to think about some rewording just to sort of clarify the point that we're seeking there, is to retain that character in that location.
And so if I could also add, drawing attention to paragraph 70 of the statement, so again page 28, the fact that that land is subject to considerable amounts of informal, unauthorised amenity use, mostly by dog walkers, but having control over that land and using a landscape and ecological management plan, which again is something which the council has done and does on other sites, it will essentially regularise and ensure that there is that access through that land, which without that could potentially be closed off by the landowner. And again, that's what feeds into the part of the exceptional circumstances.
So the key consideration there is about access and facilitating access then in a way that's more formalised than the present.
Together with ensuring the continued management of that site and using, again, we elsewhere through agricultural practices, and indeed it's yes. So access is key, but there is the wider elements in terms of ensuring its appropriate management. There.
So when you say agriculture, then an improved scheme of agriculture, what are you? I'm not sure what that's seeking to do and how it could necessarily be controlled, the plan application stage, whether you could actually get into an effective mechanism of saying, you know, somebody has to go and farm this land. How's that going to work? I'm just struggling to understand.
So we have examples elsewhere in the borough where legal agreements have been entered into, whereby essentially a scheme of management of a particular locality through agriculture. So it will agree the broad terms in terms of it will agree in broad terms how that management through agriculture will occur. So ensuring that there is that it is used appropriately in terms of arable agriculture, ensuring that the relevant hedgerows, etc., are managed and maintained as would be expected. We've and what it can do. So that is one element of it. And as I say, that the council has experience of agreeing such management plans, and it would. So it's not something that's brand new, and it's something that we feel is beneficial in relation to land such as that. And as I say, combined with that regularisation and ensuring future access, which could potentially be ceased at any other time without that control.
Just a point of clarity, just in that. Yeah, okay, so understand that. I'm just thinking, I was just looking at the sort of mapping of the area there. So if the site comes forward for residential development, how then is that parcel of land? Well, firstly, sort of who's going to own it, and how is it going to be accessed by sort of heavy farm machinery, etc., for arable farming?
So as set out of paragraph 69, it would be envisaged that the land would be management would be passed over to a management company. The land would be ownership of that would normally be. Sorry, just bear with me a second. Apologies, sir. So a number of opportunities as to who ownership can be passed to. Elsewhere in the borough where where it has happened and been agreed, land has been agreed to be passed across to the local wildlife trust. And in terms of the second point about agriculture, about access being maintained, it's envisaged that the layout can be derived in such a way to allow for relevant agricultural machinery to move through the sites and then access the land to the rear.
let's see what people say about this then. It's got David Mayer. Not got another name, so I have to introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, it's David Mayer, close enough. I'm a planner at Barton Wilmore. I'm promoting the site for Dandara. Almost fully support all the council's points given to you thus far, sir. We're happy with this parcel being included within the allocation boundary. We feel there's a compelling case for that in light of compensatory measures in the Greenbelt, opening up public access, creating public rights of way, etc. Don't fully agree with the council's points in terms of its use, and I have set this out in my matter statement, sir. Just in terms of this management under an approved scheme of agriculture, it's not necessarily something my clients are proposing to do with the site. I mean, we much more envisage this coming forward as akin to a kind of a natural area of open space, like a sort of a wildflower meadow where you'd have public rights of way running through it, and there's ancient woodland around this parcel as well, and it can establish connections into that ancient woodland too, and provide more walking routes in the area. So that's how we foresee the site coming forward, and I've suggested some proposed modifications at table 1 in my matter statement to that effect, sir.
So just in terms of Dandara's land interest, then, so who owns the land at the moment?
It's under a separate landowner, but Dandara have an option agreement on the site. So at a particular point of time, Dandara will accrue the site subject to planning permission, etc. Going forward in terms of the kind of future land ownership of that parcel, I mean, that's not something we can kind of nail down today, but there are numerous options there, sir. One is it remains in Dandara's control, but it gets open to the public. Second option is it gets passed to the council, and the council runs it as part of its kind of open space portfolio. And I think those discussions really are for another day. And I think the criterion in the council's policy, you have to forgive me, I think it's criterion 11, just which requires the delivery of this through a management plan. Section 106 agreement. I think all those discussions can happen at that stage, sir.
Okay, Ms. Borland, Margaret Borland.
Thank you, sir. Mark Booker for the Town Forum. Really on a point of information for you, sir. This kind of discussion took place in relation to the 550 house development at Knights Park in Tunbridge Wells. This is a development that was also carried out by Dandara. And it may be very interesting for you, sir, to look at the management agreement that was made between the council and Dandara under section 106 for a long-term management of the part of their site which was not going to have built development on it. So I think that's worth you're having a look at. There's a precedent there for dealing with this kind of aspect, and it seems to be working out very well in practice. The second point being that broadly we would probably think that what we've just heard from Dandara in relation to the use may be more realistic and more in line with the kind of public access which is unofficially taking place at the moment than continuing with agricultural purposes. The very large field which was taken out of this scheme, which was in the AONB, of itself, it is not particularly wonderful landscape, but it had its extreme importance in terms of the overall landscape viewed from places like the Beacon Hotel right across the AONB through to Crowborough, which would have been interrupted. So we greatly welcome the fact that that was taken out. That is the field where if you go up there any day, so you'll find half a dozen or a dozen people walking dogs almost at any time of the day, which seems to be not particularly compatible with an agricultural use with if there is a greater development of housing. So really just a point of information perhaps to help you with your research. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I think with this one, I think it's well intentioned, and I think there's certainly reason and justification for how the plan has been set out. I think under point 5, I think you need to look at the wording around point 5. This needs to have a bit more flexibility for effectiveness, because it sounds like, obviously Dandara there said, it could be a sort of wildlife meadow opened up with public access, walking, etc. And I don't think you want to get too tied down to this idea of just agriculture, because there are question marks over, well, how would you access it? You're saying that agricultural machinery could be taken through the site, but then does that not conflict with other sort of urban design, shared spaces, etc.? And you're expecting, combines to go through it and sprayers and tractors and all the rest of it. It's just, I get what the council is trying to achieve. I think the wording of it could just be looked at under point 5. So there's this real sort of a bit more flexibility, and that goes to the effectiveness of the policy. I don't think there's any disagreement about what this may become. I think it's more a fact of making sure that the policy is effective, ensuring that you get an appropriate outcome at plan application stage, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, sir. Understood.
Yeah.
We'll see to the drafting on that.
Okay, so that was the first bit. The second question I asked was about the parcel of land to the south of the existing access and what that would become used for. And I think presumably that's not within Tunbridge Wells administrative boundary then?
No, that part of the land falls within the neighbouring authority within Wealdon District Council.
And just by way of background information, really, was there ever a sort of cross-boundary wider site? Was it ever put forward that this could have been taken that parcel in as well?
Yes, sir. So the council, Dandara put forward a wider site, and Dandara have continued to put forward and promote the site in Wealdon's local plan. There has been considerable work and discussion between Wealdon Council and Tunbridge Wells Council, and it's reflected in the statement of common ground between the two authorities. Indeed, there's a protocol for proposals that are close to or at the borough boundary set out in that statement of common ground. So yes, there was. The Wealdon Council, where they are with their local plan, are still considering various sites, and they have not reached at either Regulation 18 or Regulation 19 stages a preferred strategy, and we are continuing discussions with Wealdon Council. So the Tunbridge Wells Council have therefore considered the proposal in terms of its land, the land that forms within its boundary. It is in terms of where how the borough boundary takes its form across the rest of the borough, it follows natural features. This is the only borough boundary which is essentially a line drawn on a map. It's very straight, and accordingly, the council's policies. You'll note the criterion and requirements around landscape buffering along that boundary. So this is entirely in Tunbridge Wells. There was a wider scheme considered. It's been discussed with the neighbouring authorities, but due to the differences in where the local plans are, it's been carried forward as a Tunbridge Wells allocation.
Good. So, Mr. Thorne.
Good afternoon. Yeah, hello. It's just to point out that Wealdon in 2019 conducted a Shellar where they rejected it as suitable housing for a number of reasons, and it's an area of concern to us that, as you say, it's an arbitrary line, and one side appears to be rejected and one side accepted. So that's something we'd like to raise. Thank you.
If I could very briefly, sir, say that the land on the Wealdon side, so that the Wealdon certainly is a larger parcel, is in the area of outstanding natural beauty, whereas it isn't in Tunbridge Wells. And at this point in time, Wealdon are they had a fresh call for sites since 2019. You'll be aware of what's happened with the Wealdon plan. They are in the earlier stages of their new local plan when all matters are being considered again.
Okay, thank you. So we've talked about the site boundary. We've talked about the sort of other half, as I've called it, and how that's going to be used. We talked about the sort of wider area. Question 12 really was about the area of open space remaining in the green belt to be in terms of management, and we sort of stumbled across the answer to that question as we've talked about criterion 5. So in terms of actually releasing this site from the green belt, then, and again we've talked about strategic need for housing and where housing can go, etc. But again, just to sort of same question on this site that I asked this morning, really. So at a site-specific level, then, what factors have you taken into account, and why do you think there's exceptional circumstances to release this particular parcel of land from the green belt?
Okay, similar to sort of the discussion that we had earlier on, I've set that out in response to your question 13, where we refer to the development strategy topic paper, and in particular table 5 considers this site, lands west of Edge Road at Spratsbrook Farm. In terms of the rationale for the exceptional circumstances, it's considered to be a sustainable location on the edge of the main settlement, with good connections to town and rural landscape. You know, there's opportunities to improve the landscape approach as you come into Royal Tunbridge Wells. You know, there's, as we discussed, the opportunity to provide, to sort of formalise that sort of informal sort of recreational use of the northern part of the site, and you know, that provides a buffer to the developments and provides the opportunity to create a strong greenbelt boundary in this location. I think that's sort of summarised within my response to your question there.
So what would the obviously knowing what we do about Wealdon's plan, what would become the sort of the southern greenbelt boundary then for the borough? Well, the borough boundary and the greenbelt boundary. So what's envisaged? What would that become?
How do good afternoon, sir. My name is Brian Duckett of Hankins and Duckett Associates. We're landscape consultants to the council. Just to clarify, the new buffer, the new edge, as it were, to the settlement will be as indicated on the plan R25 of the LVIA, for your reference. But basically, it's a narrow, the narrow section of land between what's determined as the northern parcel and the southern parcel, and on that edge there'll be a new landscape buffer, and that's shown on our plans. Does that help you, sir?
I was just looking at the representations as well from Dundalk. I think they've included an indicative layout. Given that that's going to become the, presumably that becomes then the greenbelt boundary, does there need to be something in the policy which makes it abundantly clear then that you are looking for sort of, well, effectively, if that's the review to the greenbelt boundary, then that would be the extent of the greenbelt. So you'd be looking at sort of, again, long-term, defensible, clearly defined boundaries. Is there a need for something in the policy, do you think, that makes that abundantly clear? Or is it in there already, perhaps?
Yes, we've got yeah, criteria 7 refers to layout, form, design, and master built developments to have regard to topography, ancient woodland buffers, impact on the setting of the high weald, and should include a landscape buffer along the southwestern boundary, including to protect the immunity of the adjacent farmhouse.
So is that the bit, are we talking about the same bit then, do we think?
Yeah.
So I think you're probably talking about the presumably, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the section. So the land shown in green on, for example, map 16 of the map 16 of the plan would remain in the green belt. So the edges of that parcel form that are the borough boundary, and the rear extent of the gardens to the Ramsley housing area, which is to the north. So taking the boundary then, which essentially follows the line between the green and orange in map 16, that section across the neck, if you like, of that that is where the greenbelt boundary would be positioned, and I agree that whilst Mr. Duckett indicated on the landscape assessment where that's shown, it isn't set out explicitly at criterion 7 that there, whilst we feel that there is a potentially suitable edge there, that there needs to be clearer clarification around that, on that very narrow neck between the edge of the southwestern edge of the Ramslie residential area and the wooded area to the south. Sorry, sir, you're on mute.
Sorry, right. So let's just get this clear then. So you've got the area to the, we'll call it the northernmost half of the site, which is going to remain as this sort of open area, wildflower meadow or whatever it'll be. So that's remaining in the green belt. You then come down and yes, then you've got this sort of neck of the site as you've described it, where clearly that would become an edge, an urban edge. So you'd have to give some appropriate consideration to that. The existing farmhouse then to the south of that, so that's within Tunbridge Wells Borough, is that right?
Yes, sir, it is.
And is that within the green belt now then?
It is within the green belt now, but the proposal would remove that from the green belt as well.
Right. Okay.
Yes. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. So when I asked in week 1 about all the changes that were proposed to the greenbelt boundary, is this then a change to the greenbelt boundary? Because it's not part of the site allocation, that house, is it?
That is right. It isn't part of the allocation.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So the house then, the farmhouse, is proposed to come out of the green belts.
Yes.
As part of the local plan. Okay, so what then, again, because obviously that would need exceptional circumstances to alter the greenbelt boundary. What then is the justification for that?
It's having a clear and defensible boundary to the green belt. If it were to remain, but the allocation were to come out, you would then have a very small section of green belt that would kink back around, essentially across, I think Mr. Duckett referred to it as the throat or neck. It would kink back around, and then go back to the very straight line which forms the Wealden boundary. I have the interactive map on my screen, and I know we've not been sort of showing screens on the Zoom calls, but it clearly indicates there that it would be a convoluted boundary kicking back in again.
I agree, because obviously I think you're right. Is that, you know, you'd have the open space, etc., that would be in the green belt, and then you would end up with a sort of an island of green belt already, wouldn't you? That wouldn't really relate to anything. Can I ask a favour? Can I ask, and forgive me because I might have already asked for it already, can you, over the next few weeks, just produce a note which sets out in sort of very basic bullet point or tabular form all the changes to the greenbelt boundary and just double check that there aren't any anomalies like this where actually there's a site allocation, but then there's a bit where you sort of, I don't know, rounded the settlement off or anything like that. Yeah, because obviously every single change needs to be justified, even if it's something as minor as this. Obviously, it needs to be justified. So, can you just pull that together and just spend a bit of time? It's worthwhile just getting somebody just to go through and just double check there's no little mapping anomalies here where there's changes to greenbelt boundaries that haven't been picked up.
Yes, sir, we will do, and we'll do a double and triple check to make sure that we've not missed any other small anomalies, as you say.
Yeah, and vice versa. If you've, I don't know, if the opposites occurs, where an area has ended up in the greenbelt because you've rounded something off or done something like that. Okay, so going back to the initial question then. So you've got use a very straight borough boundary. You've got this house then coming out of the greenbelt, and where that boundary goes sort of northwest to southeast, and this is the thick black line on your policies map, which is your borough boundary, because that would be your borough boundary and the greenbelt boundary. Again, it's whether the policy should just be explicitly clear that then becomes a clearly defined sort of landscaped feature, which I think, to be fair to Dandara, I know it's only indicative, but they show that anyway. So unless Mr. Mayor wants to sort of jump in at this stage, I don't think there's any sort of conflict or objection there. But just making sure that it's not that your greenbelt boundary is clearly defined, and it's not just a 6-foot fence along the back of some houses or something like that, essentially. Mr. Mayor, I don't know if you want to jump in at this stage. You're sort of happy with that suggestion? It seems to reflect your plan anyway.
No, sir. Yeah, happy with all that, and congrats to you for spotting the Greenbelt Island, which I think we all missed. So, yeah, happy to work with the council on that one, sir.
So I'm going to propose some additional wording to paragraph 7 of the policy to deal with that strengthening of the boundary, and it's going to be required in relation to the neck as well, between the retained greenbelt area and the released area.
Okay. So thoughts about that. And again, if anybody's made representations and wants to jump in, please do raise your hand. Yeah, Town Forum.
Actually, this time it's Margaret Borland representing CPRE Kent. We seem to have lost that bit off the naming this time around, but I'm clearly representing CPRE Kent. I don't intend to go through all the previous discussions about greenbelt release, just to say that CPRE doesn't believe that there are exceptional circumstances for greenbelt release at this site, despite its sustainable location. And the primary reason, although others are set out in our representations, is that the intensification of development at sustainable non-greenbelt sites in Royal Tunbridge Wells and other areas potentially mean that this is not a necessary site for development to meet the housing need. Somebody earlier said about greenbelt, when it's gone, and that's absolutely true about this one. And we're talking about 5 hectares of developable area for a housing development on the edge of the urban area, which would fit into into about a quarter of that 5 hectares if you actually intensified the development within that. So if you have to release it from greenbelt, it should be less land that we're losing. Thank you. Oh, and sorry, Town Forum down to talk as well.
Right, good afternoon again, sir. Yes, Mark Booker, Town Forum. Really just to endorse what's just been said. And again, as with Canewood, to suggest that should you still be minded to agree the allocation that the possibility of an allocation, that rather that you look at safeguarding this land, which would enable it to remain free from any allocation or development for 5 years, during which time quite a lot we think is going to happen in and around Royal Tunbridge Wells in terms of development, which was not perhaps envisaged to be deliverable at this point in time. So that would be our request, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Thorne?
Hello, thank you. Yes, if I could also support those points. We believe that all 5 boxes for the greenbelt are ticked by this site and it should remain in it. The argument of exceptional circumstances, and I should confess I am a local resident here, of preventing any sort of barriers going up by the landowner in the future seems to be unlikely. We've never heard of any, it seems to be a threat that doesn't really exist, and I'm not sure how it would be done if the landowner chose to. So I think I can't see the exceptional, we're worried that the exceptional circumstances do not apply here. And I would just add as well, I think the little greenbelt island we've been discussing, I would need to double check, but I believe that might also be ancient woodland as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Move the conversation on to talk about AONB setting. So obviously the council talked about the larger site and how this allocation has changed. In terms of the allocation that's now proposed in the plan, what does the council envisage by way of any necessary mitigation, or is it just the use of land and actually the northern parcel being free from development, which would be the necessary mitigation towards any landscape impacts on the AONB, or is there anything else within the residential site itself that the council is expecting to see for this development?
If I can refer you to, is that? No. Can you hear me okay, sir? The landscape and visual impact assessment had a number of suggested mitigation elements. One was the open space that you just alluded to. Secondly, the structure planting, which was to go along the southern edge of the proposed allocation. But we would also anticipate that there would be a significant amount of green infrastructure within the actual allocation itself, sir, on the basis that the site is on sloping land and there would be a need to break down the development with some green infrastructure running through the development area. And that might indeed suggest or reinforce the idea that this has a slightly lower density of development than some of the other sites, because you've got a higher proportion of green infrastructure that's anticipated.
Here's a test for somebody. What was the density that was proposed from the table? I've not got a table in front of me. I've not got it open, but the council produced a helpful table which showed the density. Don't suppose anybody's...
This site, it's 24 dwellings per hectare.
Okay, thank you. And anybody at this stage, any comments or representations just on landscape sensitivities or impact on the AONB that they've made in their reps they want to raise? Nope. Oh, Mr. Thorne.
Could I just very quickly again mention that we've got a historic monument at the bottom of the field there as well. So any encroaching on that is obviously going to be of concern to us as well. So regarding, I mean, it's currently farmed, it's historically been farmed, and we've all got along very nicely with it. And so if that could be borne into consideration, please. Thank you.
Just whilst we're on buffers and landscape buffers, one of the points within 7, I know the council sort of committee to have a look at some of the detailed wording. Part of it was about protecting the amenity of the adjacent farmhouse. What's the justification for that then? Obviously, presumably it would just be a residential development, and we've talked about how it would have its own landscape buffers. So just was there a particular concern about the amenity of the occupants of that property?
I think it's just as we've referred to in our response to question 15, it's just to, we've got criteria 7 in there, and it's ensuring there's appropriate buffer there for the farmhouse, protecting amenity and the sort of the landscape there. So yeah.
And again, in terms of the Mr. Thorne raised the issue of the scheduled ancient monuments. Again, how's the council taken that into account, and are you confident that a scheme can come forward without any adverse impacts in that regard?
Yeah, and again, would refer you to page 34 of the statement where we refer to this. There's the criteria set out within the policy at criteria 8 that requires detailed historic landscape and archaeological assessment, and we talk about the heritage assets, including the High Rocks Hill Fort, so the scheduled ancient monument there. And it's also something that we've had discussions with our heritage officer within the council, but also with Historic England as well. And we haven't referred to it in the statement, but there is a signed statement of common ground with Historic England. And they specifically refer to this matter because it was something that they'd raised at the Reg 18 stage of the local plan. But para 4.16 of the statement of common ground, they specifically refer to it that they did have initial concerns, but now following the reduction of the allocation and the LVIA work, they're happy with the allocation as it now stands and the criteria that we've set out in the policy.
And Mr. Mayor, whilst we've got you here, you'd raised some concerns, I think, in your representations about part of the wording around criterion 9, I think, provision of on-site amenity, natural green space, which sort of talked about, and recreation ground. You want to just take me through those concerns?
Yeah, indeed, sir. Thank you. I've got 1 or 2 other points as well, just after, if you wouldn't mind, sir. But yeah, just on the recreation ground clause, I guess. I have spoken with the council on this, and I think our thoughts are aligned on it in terms of, we do see some kind of formal recreation provision here in the form of potentially like a village green or some sort of layout within the site, but just the recreation ground wording is just a little bit too formal for us. It almost implies kind of playing pitches and floodlights, and that the site really, it doesn't lend itself to that type of recreation ground. So we just propose that the wording is changed to recreation provision.
I take the council's views on that.
Yeah, just coming back on that, the requirement for the wording recreation ground is direct reference to policy OSSR 2 of the local plan, where it sets out, what should be required in terms of a number of residential units sort of proposed, and so over 100 dwellings sort of triggers that requirement for recreation ground. But I think that there certainly could be some flexibility around what that recreation ground type use is. The open space sport and recreation study that's informed the local plan does set out that there's a number of different forms a recreation ground could take. It could be formal pitches, or it could be informal recreation and sport, landscape and amenity features and things like that. So that's set out at 5.2.3.6 of the open space sport and recreation study. But I think we could have a look at the wording of the policy and sort of refer to recreation uses as opposed to recreation grounds if that was considered more appropriate in that criteria.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that would just reflect what the other policy requires anyway. So, so that'd be a change for effectiveness.
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, you had some other points?
Thanks, sir. Yeah, I just had two other points. I think you're coming to the end of your questions, so if I may. My first point really just relates to the quantum of development, and we have a scheme which is allocated for approximately 120 dwellings, so we support the use of approximately there. At 24 dwellings per hectare. Through our working, sir, we consider that the site could achieve more, 35 dwellings per hectare, landscape sensitive scheme, getting us up to about 170 units, sir. So, and I attended the earlier Matter 2 section whereby you were invited by participants to consider an uplift on the need number in the plan, and there was all sorts of considerations, uncapped needs, affordability ratios, that type of stuff. So the long and the short of it, sir, is that just through your workings on that, and you probably haven't arrived at any conclusions just yet, but if you do consider there is a need to uplift the council's figures, then we think this is a site that could definitely make a positive contribution in that regard. And then my second point then, sir, is just on the self-build, custom build element to the policy. So it's within the actual initial text rather than a subsequent criterion. We generally support the kind of 5% provision of such to be delivered. I have just asked for an if required clause in my matter statement. And I just asked for that because there's currently 193 people on the council's register as of today. This site in the council's trajectory is predicted to come forward in 2035, which we don't necessarily agree with, but we live with that. So my point is that, the actual need based on the register is certainly unknown, kind of longer term in particular, but also possibly shorter and medium term. So, if there's not a need at a particular time for when an application comes forward, then, provision may not need to be made. So we just ask for an if required kind of proposed mod onto that policy, sir. That's it. Thank you.
The council wants to come back on either of those 2 points.
So in terms of the first point, so the council's view is that the wording is approximately 120 dwellings. We have had considerable, I'll start again. The consideration as to the numbers that we feel the site can accommodate reflects the work undertaken, including the additional landscape work at post-regulation 18 stage. at the same time, we do recognise that the wording is approximately, and there could, well, you know, within that there is scope for more than 120 houses. In terms of the but ultimately that figure has been arrived at through the consideration of the evidence base and the Sheila and the assessments that we've spoken about previously. There's also been reference, you know, to the landscape buffering required, to the provision of on-site recreation, etc., which has been taken into account in arriving at that figure. In terms of the custom and self-build, I'm not sure if I can't remember if Mr. Mayer was at the session yesterday when we discussed custom and self-build, and the council set out its reasoning and justification as to why it is a requirement in this policy. It's not set out as one of the numbered ones, but is in the text right at the beginning of the policy. And again, there's there is the point in the custom and self-build policy, which we discussed yesterday afternoon, about if the sites don't come forward, then that they can then be sold onto the market. So we don't feel that there's any alterations necessary in respect of either of those points.
Yeah, we talked about this policy H8, isn't it? Self-build. We talked about this yesterday in quite some detail in terms of the overall needs, etc. And one of the changes that we did talk about was exactly this point about, you know, plots marketed for 6 months, buyer not being found, then they could go to the open market, and then we talked about removing the requirement to offer them to the council, didn't we? So
yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah, talked about that. Okay. I didn't have any other questions on this site, unless anybody else wanted to raise any points for or against that we've not already discussed. No. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. What we'll do is, as I said before, we'll take a short comfort break. So for those of you who only wanted to talk about this site, please, you know, you don't have to stick with it if you don't want to carry on with hearing the rest of the discussion. If it was just this site, then when we have a break, feel free to leave the Teams meeting, or stick with it. Then we'll have a break. We'll come back at 3:15. And then we'll just go through, I think there's just 3 or 4 more sites to go through. And then that'll be us done. Okay, so we'll resume at 1:15, please. Thank you. Okay, thanks everyone. We'll resume and continue with the remaining sites this afternoon, just for you to go through near there. Two sites I want to look at in particular next, which I believe RTW12 and RTW13, they're both individual allocations. But were these two sites a single allocation in the site allocations plan?
Yes, so yeah, I refer to this on page 6 in my statement. So there was ALRTW 13 in the site allocations local plan. It was a joint allocation for the BT Engineering Centre and also the Turner's Pie Factory, and they were one single allocation for 170 dwellings. In reviewing the sites within the site allocations local plan and sort of circumstances at the time, we sought to allocate the BT site in the Reg 18 local plan, but the Turner's Pie Factory site was still in operation as a pie factory at that time, and there wasn't any certainty at that stage as to whether the site was going to be available. So the pie factory wasn't in the Reg 18 local plan, but since that point in time, the pie factory has actually ceased operations as a pie factory, and the council obviously made aware of that was going to be happening, and so the pie factory site was included as an allocation in the Reg 19 local plan. We thought it was important to have the two allocations as separate allocations, reflecting the different ownership of the two sites, sort of providing more certainty of them coming forward, but that they may not come forward at the same time, and so that there's two separate allocations as you can see, ALRTW 12 and ALRTW 13.
Okay, so in terms of we'll deal with the RTW 12 first then.
Yeah.
So just in terms of that, then obviously if that was within the previous site allocation, it's the same sort of question as before, really. What confidence has the council got that, given it's not come forward to date, that it still remains justified to as an allocation in this plan?
Yeah. So I think we've set out in our statement of seeing the assessment that we've gone through, and in terms of the developability of the site, we've set that out on page 8 of our statement. And really, I think the site's being promoted through the process. There are reps made at the various stages of the local plan supporting the inclusion. We've had recent correspondence on the status of it from the site promoter. It's understood that the existing building there has been used as a depot by BT, while the upgraded fibre optic broadband within Royal Tunbridge Wells has been rolled out. But then it's understood that following that, it will then become available for redevelopment. I think they had intended to cease operation at the site, but they've just been using it for that purpose, and they've committed that it will then be available following that. So this stated it will be available for redevelopment within the next 3 to 5 years, and so that's been reflected within the trajectory as well.
Okay, thank you. One of the questions asked about this was about wastewater infrastructure. I asked this question under a few sites because it related to reps that had been made, which appeared to be, this was reps from Southern Water, sort of querying wastewater infrastructure provision. I've noticed in your hearing statement that you said that you'd had further discussions with them, I think, and you'd sort of taken a view that for all of these sites, it wasn't something that was specifically required as development management policy within each of the allocation, and that essentially the plans read as a whole, and there'd be other policies that would cover these sorts of issues. Is that a sort of fairly accurate summary then?
Yes, yeah, we had discussions with Southern Water following the Reg 19 consultation, and we've got a statement of common ground which I refer to in my statement, and Southern Water were happy that actually, rather than having that sort of repetitive criteria in each of the policy, it was adequately addressed within policy EN24 of the local plan. And so there's a criteria underneath the policy box that refers to that, and Southern Water were happy with that approach, and the statement of common ground reflects that.
Okay, so there was no wastewater infrastructure, existing infrastructure there that was somehow precluding these sites from coming forward. There's no sort of showstoppers in that regard. Fine. And finally, then, just on this site, the proposed pedestrian cycle link to the north of the site. So just tell me again what's, because this is shown, I think, on map 12, I think it is, in the plan. So what's envisaged here? What would be a requirement of the development here?
Again, as referred to in my statement, we've actually included appendix. It's not that one. Sorry, no. Yeah, at the site layout plan here at 12, it's just in sort of incorporating improved pedestrian cycle links within this area. It's an area that we refer to in terms of the LC WIP and low traffic neighbourhoods and sort of improvements of those linkages. So that's really just taking that into account, and we've got the criteria 3 of the policy that refers to that. And I think that's something that could be addressed through the detailed sort of scheme that comes forward in terms of how that can work.
So this pedestrian cycle link then continues, then, doesn't it, through? Yeah. Through the adjacent site as well.
Yeah.
And so is that then a requirement of that site as well?
I think we've got a requirement for linkages, criteria 1. Pedestrian linkages, include provision of pedestrian linkages between Broadwater Lane and Linden Gardens. So yeah, so it's recognising that these 2 sites and ensuring linkages with the wider area.
Presumably, if one of them comes forward ahead of the other, then, say for example, RTW 12 came forward first, and presumably there'd be only so much that site could do without the other one coming forward at the same time. So
yeah,
do you think there's sufficient flexibility in the plan?
Yes, I think so. I think we would just have to consider each one at the time. We'll obviously get on to the AL RTW 30, the pie factory, but that's actually, we actually have a planning application in on that one at the moment, so we can come on to that one next.
Okay. Yeah, so talk to me about the application there then. So that's obviously, again, I asked the similar questions about the deliverability, etc. But in terms of the current update, then I think it sounds like things have progressed on that site.
Yeah, so in terms of the pie factory site, page 13, 14, and on, we talk about the fact that there is a planning application that's been submitted to the council in January 2022. It's still being considered at the moment. There's a number of considerations that are being worked through in relation to that planning application at the moment. So the application's in for 94 residential dwellings. Obviously, the allocation is approximately 100, so it's broadly in line with the allocation.
And again, just in terms of the mix of uses, so I asked a specific question about the uses and the mix of uses. And in particular, I think it was with the home working.
Yes. So I think that's I think in terms of that policy, we were keen that there was a focus for the site, and in discussions with the agents promoting the site, you know, they considered a community sort of remote working hub, and that was something that we thought would be positive in terms of that, you know, focus for that development. And so it is part of the policy. And I know that there's a couple of questions that you had in relation to the delivery and management of that hub. You know, we've provided a response there and acknowledged that possibly we could provide some amendments to that policy to say, you know, provision of a remote working community hub for use by resident new development if practicable, at page 16, to reflect that it's not a necessity in probably in this location, but it's something that we think would be positive as part of that mix of uses on that site. But possibly we need some flexibility in the policy there.
Yeah, I think so. Just also, it sounds like it's been reflected in the plan application that's come forward anyway. But yeah, just some details, just slight flexibility.
Yeah.
Obviously, yeah, you know, these are brownfield sites within the urban area, so ones to be obviously promoting to come forward and ensuring that they do come forward. So
yeah.
Okay, I'll go to some comments. We've got Margaret Borland.
Hi, I'm sure you are heartily sick of hearing from me by now. So I've got one very simple question on this. Is there a simple explanation for why the density the density for RTW 12 is so much lower than the density for RTW 13? Because 12, it's saying, is 74, and I gather that may go down slightly if because of the planning application that's been put in, but not very much. And the old telephone centre is 46. They're next door to each other. I'm very confused. Thank you. And sorry, my partner in crime.
Okay, yeah, go on, and then we'll go back to the council.
Yeah, right. Well, from our point of view as a town forum, we broadly strongly support both of these sites coming forward. They're very sustainable. They're very much in the town centre. They have very suitable access to public transport, not very far from the central railway station. As to the densities which Margaret Borland has raised, the Turner's factory at 100 per at 100 actual units and 74 per hectare is probably about right. We're always looking to see whether that can be slightly tweaked upwards, and we agree with CPRE that perhaps the figure for the BT engineering could be reviewed as to whether that density might be increased, but broadly we very strongly support both of these sites coming forward as an allocation. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. So just in terms of the density on RTW 12 then, so what's the density of development, and again reasons for that?
Yeah, I think sort of going back to the Sheila and the work that was carried out to inform the allocations, having a look at the character of those areas and the surrounding sort of densities, that the pie factory site you know, is also, in terms of the topography, it was considered that actually that could deliver a high density, taking account of that as well, and the high densities that are in the location there. The BT site to the other side it sits higher, so I think potentially more constrained there in terms of heights. And there are sort of lower density, slightly lower density properties surrounding that area as well, in Linden Gardens and that location there. So I think it's just as the urban grain changes in that area, the densities that we've applied there would, are different, even though the sites are adjacent to each other.
Okay, thank you. Just in terms of the Turner's Pie Factory then, question 8 was about, is it clear to users of the plan what measures will be expected to provide necessary noise barrier between the site and the petrol filling station? So is it clear what's expected in that regard?
Yeah, I think my response again to question 8 on page 19 refers to the criteria that we've got within the policy. Criteria 5. So we talk about measures to form a noise barrier between the site and the petrol filling station incorporated as part of the proposal. And also I've referred to the planning statement as part of the current planning application, where they've they're seeking to address that requirement by planning noise assessment that's been submitted as part of the planning application. So I thought it was worthy highlighting that.
If I could just add, so the paragraph 39 sets out that, as with the other allocation policies, reference is made to other relevant development management policies, in that instance policy EN 27.
Ms. Borland?
Apologies, I raised the wrong hand before. Mrs. Booker wishes to speak.
Yes, just to comment on the clarification we had from the council concerning the density on site 12. The nature of the topography does seem to be a material factor to us in differentiating those sites, but we do hope that the greatest appropriate density could be assured on that site 12, but certainly from local knowledge there is a quite significant difference in levels, and we accept that will affect the planning possibilities. Thank you, sir.
Okay. And then the final question was just a reiteration, because it was raised by Southern Water on all of these sites, but we've already dealt with that. RTW 16 we've talked about. So we're now up to the former allotments on Speldhurst Road. Just bear with me whilst I bring that up. So this is a site then that's already got permission, is that right?
Yes.
And it's already under construction.
Yeah.
Is this one's under construction, isn't it?
Yes, it's this one, it's got permission. It's under construction and part complete at the moment.
Do you know how is it just started, nearing completion?
It's nearing completion. Yeah.
Okay. Just wondering whether it remains valid as justified as an allocation, really. If it's depends. I think with these type of sites, it always depends how complete they are. Obviously, if you've got a site like this which is under construction and there may be potentially scope for changes in plans or anything like that, then I always say it's not unsound to have it in your plan. I think where you've got a site which is for all intents and purposes completed and people living there, then I would say, well, it's not justified to be an allocation in the plan, because clearly people are there and residing there. So Also, I can go and have a look myself, but just in terms of, do you feel it probably falls just about into the category of it's acceptable to be in the plan?
Yeah, I'm not aware that there's people living there as
Right,
yet.
okay.
It's still, you know, getting towards the sort of completed stage, but
Okay.
yeah, so I think it's probably appropriate that it's still within the plan at this stage.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Any questions, observations on this one? Sounds like it's under construction, so I'm progressing along. No. And then the other one is the land at Baldwin's Lane. So is this in a similar position then?
Yeah, this one had planning permission granted in March 2021. We in our statement, page 37, we've just given an update that the existing building on site's been demolished, but the council's currently awaiting applications for discharge of conditions in relation to that planning consent. So that's not as far progressed as the other one.
And it just in terms of the plan then is just again a sort of sense check really. There's no conflict between what's been approved and the plan. There's nothing to suggest that, you know, the two are wildly different in any way. No. Okay. Any comments on that one again, Baldwin's Lane, from anybody? Okay, well, that wraps up the sites for this afternoon then. So slightly earlier finish. It's hopefully maybe go somewhere to offset some of the later finishes. It is Friday, it is warm, so we've done well to get through there and get finished. Next week we are down to sort of continue our sort of way through the site allocations. Obviously next week was down to be a virtual week anyway, because of the sort of nature of these smaller sites, etc. So as far as I'm aware, I know that Charlotte's not here this afternoon. She is around next week. Have you had the links for next week's sessions? I don't think I have, but I just wanted to check with the council if you had your Zoom links. And again, is that something for yourselves? Are you producing the links and then pass them to Charlotte, or the other way around?
Yeah, so the links have been sent to Charlotte. They were sent yesterday. My understanding was that she was going to send them round yesterday, but I'm not sure if she got round to that, but they have been sent.
Okay, so that's also all the meetings are set up for next week.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same format. We don't need to be aware of anything else. Nothing different will occur. Charlotte will issue the relevant links to the relevant people. It's all seemed to work fine this week. So no, nothing other to report really, other than we'll continue as we have been doing. Sessions start 10 o'clock on next Tuesday.
Yep.
Chris, is there anything sort of?
No, I'll check the emails that came in yesterday. I think I saw them, so I'll check and I'll talk to Charlotte's back Monday lunchtime now, so I'll just sort of check those invitations, make sure.
Yeah, just making sure that people have got the relevant invites for the it's continuation of the Royal Tunbridge Wells sites on Tuesday morning anyway. So yeah. Jolly good. Anything else?
Not from us, I think, sir. But thank you very much indeed.
No, can all go and have a cold drink.
Yes.
Cool down. Excellent. Okay.
Have a good weekend, sir. Thank you.
Thank you all for your time, and we'll adjourn and resume then back on Tuesday.